to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. I kind of want to get into a little bit of, we'll cover the economy, but we're going to kind of start off with something that eventually will kind of link into the economy. But what we've been seeing with China, buying up gold, making the new currency, trying to, make deals to maybe trade oil in this currency and everything that's going on. And then I seen today, more aerial photos of those reefs that have been built up by the Chinese military, and now there's airfields and hangars and jets on these islands, disputed islands, not even, there's more than one claim to it. But China's just going ahead and building them for military purposes. And then I caught the Ron Paul Liberty Report. And according to the Pentagon-linked RAND Corporation, there are several scenarios where a U.S.-China war may break out. We already know that we're going back and forth about patrols in the South China Sea and all this, and I'm not sure exactly what could pop off, but the thing is, there is definitely a shift in the world to, at least by, China, Russia, to kind of go after the West. And what gets me is a lot of what Russia and China, we always hear about, China trying to, or not China, but Russia's trying to rebuild the Soviet Union. And I don't really believe that they are trying to rebuild the Soviet Union, definitely by taking back Crimea. I think these are just things that they're doing to protect themselves from the West. I may be wrong on that. There might be some intention to rebuild the Soviet Union. But I kind of have the belief that they kind of learned from getting too big and having too many internal problems. China, they've kind of mastered their police state, should I say, in their little, Hong Kong and Beijing, that, they might have some exemptions for big business, or even some of their smaller, domestic companies, which they don't care about the copyrights. So I do think that there is a point that we're getting to where you look at this and will there be a time where they finally go, we think the U.S. is weak enough, let's test them. And I want to go ahead and play this Ron Paul Liberty Report. We'll get into this a little bit more. War with China unthinkable, think again.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. Today with me is Daniel McAdams, who is the co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. I'd like to visit today on the subject of China. We've done this before, and the big question is are some real problems developing with China? There's some people who seem to agitate and want to produce problems, and other people would say, well, is all this necessary? And on one hand, we see evidence that China might be spending a little bit more money on their military and that they are becoming more aggressive. And others say, well, compared to what? And we want to talk a little bit about that. There was an article in Reuters that talked about a RAND study. And RAND, tried to have a balanced report. On the one hand, what would a war be like? It's something that, quite frankly, I don't think anybody can visualize. We can't really predict what event might cause a hot war and exactly how it evolves. I think most wars have a life of their own. But it's serious stuff, and it means something to the American people. It means something to our liberties and our sovereignty and our spending and all these things. Even scaremongering has an effect on this, and what are we going to do? And of course, the Cold War was fortunately, designed in such a way we didn't have to have a hot war with the Soviets and with nuclear weapons. But sometimes things get out of control. So I'm sure you took a look at this RAND study and the Reuters article about where we're going on this, and what do you think the odds are that this could turn into being a hot war?
Yeah, it's interesting. We both found this on Zero Hedge that made reference to the Reuters piece and the study by the RAND Corporation, which is close to the Pentagon. It's funded by the U.S. military. So you could say it's as close to Pentagon thinking as you can get, really. And what it was the study was looking at scenarios whereby a U.S.-China war could break out. And one of the conclusions is it's not a big shocker, but it's a premeditated war between the U.S. and China is unlikely. The mishandling of the various conflicts, especially the territorial conflicts, could lead to sort of a World War I scenario where things start rolling in that direction inexorably and in a difficult way to stop.
Now, the way I understand it is that there's not been a major confrontation. A lot of vessels go up and down, the China Sea. And we're involved. A lot of countries do it. I haven't heard the story where China has actually tried to obstruct these vessels going back and forth. The argument seems to be around the dredging up of new islands, but China's doing it, but Vietnam is doing it, the Philippines are doing it. So I think that the question is not so simple that it's the freedom of the seas, unless you know of some confrontation where the Chinese literally stopped peaceful vessels going up and down the South China Sea.
Well, it wouldn't really be in their interest, especially when you talk about commercial vessels,
No.
But, in the news today, besides this is sort of the background, but the sort of the breaking story, we were watching some of the cable news this morning. Big news, China is building aircraft hangars on these islands that it dredged up, and it's one of the headlines was they're defying international law by doing this. And, this also goes back to the recent ruling by the tribunal attached to the Law of the Sea Treaty, which ruled in favor of the Philippines. But it's interesting that it's big news that China is building up these aircraft hangars. What's not really talked about that much is that Vietnam has been moving mobile rocket launchers onto its islands in the region that are targeting Chinese vessels.
Right.
So,
and I think Vietnam now is on our side, and if there is a breakout of conflict there, everybody supposes that the Vietnamese will be, proxy for us and will be on our side in this regard. But a ruling, by the Law of the Sea Treaty, that's rather interesting, that they're hiding behind that they've ruled this way and it's China's fault and this sort of thing, and we jump on this. Yeah, we don't even belong to the Law of the Sea Treaty, and they're using this. So we take the position we don't have to sign it. One of the reasons we've never signed it, it's in violation of our national sovereignty, and I probably wouldn't argue with that. Yeah. I don't want any of these treaties. But the arrogance and the hypocrisy of us using it, like the International Criminal Court.
Exactly.
We don't join that. It's not going to be used against our people. War crimes against Americans around the world, have we ever committed one? Oh, heavens no. We've never killed a person and never gotten involved in an illegal war once. We don't do that, but we're not adverse to using the International Criminal Court to bring those other bad people to justice.
And also using it as a propaganda ploy, look, Gaddafi's wanted by the International Criminal Court, so-and-so is wanted by this court, even though we wouldn't dare participate in. But you mentioned Vietnam and also the changing alliances, and it is significant because here's Vietnam making a fairly provocative move toward China. And this comes after, if you remember, and I think we even did an episode on this, President Obama was in Vietnam in May, and when he was there, he opened up Vietnam to greater purchase of U.S. military stuff. So that's more welfare for the military-industrial complex, but also heightens the tension, expanded U.S.-Vietnamese military cooperation and training and all these things, which is also provocative, and to top it off, promised over the next 5 years $500 million more military aid.
Yeah, this is the whole thing. And that's part of the free trade deal, so we can sell more weapons. So, yes, it's narrow. And the other thing, even if we move sometimes in the direction with these various countries toward more free trade, it really doesn't qualify because most of the time it's subsidized trades, Export-Import Bank and these various things. So it isn't, free trade as we understand it. And yet this one, looks like it's trade with a lot of weaponry, which goes on quite frequently. I see we just sold a lot of weapons to Saudi Arabia. They're the third highest in expenditures, for militarism.
Yeah, and in the beginning with this RAND report, it's an accident, it's a miscalculation based on tensions in the region. Well, this is, when I first started thinking about the show today, I thought, well, this is a real concrete, not theoretical, concrete argument for non-interventionism. Because the U.S. is intervening in this conflict. The U.S. is egging the Vietnamese on, egging the Philippines on to confront China. Just days after this court ruled in favor of the Philippines against China, the U.S. gave the Philippines 2 more naval warships. So they're using this to ramp it up. And so if this is where a war may come about, then it's all the more reason to pull back and not be involved.
Yes, and then we have obligations, the kind of treaties I don't like. We have a treaty with the Philippines, and at least it's subtle enough that if China got into a conflict with Vietnam in our behalf, we're going to be there. So these arrangements are just horrible. And when you compare this to this type of activity, if it were going on around our country or close to our country or involving the Gulf of Mexico or something, all of a sudden it would be a different story. We wouldn't tolerate that for a minute, but nobody wants to see it that way because some people just like to build up, the antagonism. Once again, we can build more weapons if there's a threat, but I think we have a chart on the expenditures, that we'd like to take a look at, because the argument is, well, China's on the march, they're on the move, they're militarizing, and they're spending more money. But this chart to me is rather impressive. Look at what we spend on the right, almost $600 billion, and when you up everything, it's a lot more than that. Yeah. But China's the next 7 countries, China spends the most of that group, but it's still like what, under 200 billion?
It's about 146 billion, which is actually sharply up from the previous year.
Yeah, so they are spending more, but this whole idea that that's the reason that we have to spend even more money, and there's a fallacy built into this because a lot of people gave Reagan, I think, credit where it wasn't due, is that he brought down the Soviet system because he forced them to spend more money on militarism because we were building more military weapons. I just don't think that explains, the deeply flawed economic system. But this is also has economic ramifications, what we're talking about here. And I think the Rand article talked about how is this going to play out? Because it could really damage China. It costs them money, GDP is going down, and all these things. But the same thing can happen to the U.S. Maybe this would be, in a way, our Waterloo. There's a point of no return where we can't afford any more of these wars. So if we do get into some conflict like this, it can explode. Right now, there's an explosion because all the candidates want to rebuild our military. $600 billion isn't enough. We need a lot more. So how much more can we afford when we have this a huge debt and the deficit is continuing to grow? So I think the economic consequence on us is every bit as serious. And since we've been able to get away with it for a longer period of time because we get to print the world currency, it's a different situation. It could really come back to haunt us.
When you look at the recession or whatever you'll call it of 2007 and 2008 and the repercussions of that across the economy, according to the Rand study, the real battle of between the U.S. and China would be in the GDP, as you said, and they predicted a 5 to 10% reduction of U.S. GDP per year of the conflict. What do you think that would do to the economy?
Well, it's going to put it in shambles. In reality, that would be a number, but I don't think the nominal number of GDP will necessarily go down because if we shift spending or increase spending by printing money, and we have more militarism, and we go from 600 to 800 billion, that boosts the GDP. So they always play tricks with these numbers, and they would continue to do with it. But real wealth in the country would continue to deteriorate. So today, there's a large GDP out there, but middle class, the middle class is not sharing it. And that's what happens in wartime, too, because, I remember a little bit about the tail end of the Depression. I remember World War II really well. And World War II was terrible for the economy. So the standard of living went way down during wartime, although people were working and they were paying down their debt and doing these things. But war is devastating to an economy, and real wealth does go down because the real wealth goes into building more bombs. But we're already militarized to such an extreme that is a reason, that's one of the major contributing factors to the middle class here. But we don't get to hear about that in the debates, that it's our military presence overseas that is one of the factors that hurts the middle class. It's always somebody else. We have a tendency, and the people like it because it sells politically, is blame somebody else. And right now, it's China. They're building up, and we have a problem. We have to contend with it. But what about economically? This whole idea that we should have that China is ripping us off. In reality, China's not ripping us off. I think we're ripping them off because they're taking our paper money, and they take it and they monetize it, and they have their inflation. Now they're going through the correction. Gives us a chance to export some of this money away from the inflationary impact here in this country. And then China accommodates us by buying our debt, and they subsidize us, so they keep the bubble going. But on the short run, tremendous benefit to issue the world currency, because right now the argument is we're going to be tough on China. They keep devaluing their currency, and there's all these unfair trade agreements. Just 2 months ago, we put a 500% increase in the tariff on steel. China happens to make half the steel of the world, and it's the cheapest. Obviously, it must be pretty good steel. And so, and we depend on it. We import steel, as do all the other major industrial nations. So they depend on this cheap, good steel, and we put on tariffs. And what is the cry to solve our problems? More tariffs on China. So it doesn't make any economic sense, but it sure sells politically.
Yeah, I remember back when we were on the Hill, and we had some friends in the district who had businesses where they imported very specific specialty steel, and it wasn't made in the U.S., and they were going to get put out of business because of this arbitrary tariff going on the steel, and we were going to lose a lot of jobs in the district.
Yeah, and the reason they didn't make it, it was some type of regulation or environmental thing or something that the regulations actually prevented it from being made here. It wasn't worth their while to do it, so they were totally dependent on an import. So the solution is put on a tariff, which makes no sense. I think this military stuff that we're talking about, it's real because it can get out of hand. And one reason why it can drift into a hot war is both sides misjudge their adversary. They always figure, well, they wouldn't do this. They wouldn't do this. They say that was really what happened in Vietnam. It could break out, but I think the economic war that is going on and the misinformation we have now on who's violating the currency. Is it China? They do devalue their currency, but we do it continuously. But we have this privilege of doing it. It's gold, in the international circles. So we get to do it, and we get to dump our dollars overseas and sell them products. So what we do is going to and is annoying a lot of people, but to say that we don't play the same game is just not true. We just have a better deck, in our hand, a better hand, because we can get away with it, and we're a powerhouse militarily and financially. If we don't like somebody, we freeze their assets. We dictate to the International Criminal Court and the Law of Sea treaties and the IMF and all these things, and we win these arguments. And I think long term, what that does is build up animosity. But what I'm concerned about is with this blatant a confrontation on trade and the blame game going on. It means if China and some other countries get upset with us, who knows, they might decide to have their own reserve currency. They might decide that they will dump dollars, and they don't want to dump them too fast right now. But what if push came to shove? I think they have a lot of cards to play yet, because I think it could be very, very harmful to us. That war, the economic war, the trade war, the currency wars, I believe sincerely, and I've talked about this a lot, it could bring down the dollar. Mm-hmm. Now that's something to consider. As bad as all this other stuff is, I think the odds of that is much greater than us ending up with a lot of battleships and troops and a World War II war with China. I just don't think that's going to happen.
You just have to ask yourself, what is the point of all of this confrontation? What is the point of this interventionism if, as you say, it can completely bring down the dollar and our way of life?
Yeah. Well, I think they're ignorant about economic policy, and they don't realize it, and they also want power and control. And as you said, Daniel, economic interventionism can lead to one more problem on top of another one. In this incident we're talking about in China, and right now, whether it's the military intervention or the economic intervention, it's not good, because there's no clear-cut understanding of what a free society is all about, what it would be like if we, at least generally moved in the direction of a non-aggression principle, sound money, and living up with contracts, believing in private property, and getting rid of these entangling alliances, and getting rid of the bureaucracy that runs the whole world right now, because this invites special interests, whether it's the banking interests here in this country to write the rules, or whether it's the FDA and the drug companies to write the rules where there are problems. They don't understand that private property and contracts can solve these problems without a gigantic bureaucracy which is taken over by the special interest and bankrupts the country. And that's what's happening today. They've taken over, the country is bankrupt, but there's no signs that anybody's going to give up 1 ounce of power. It's just going to be further distortion of who's at fault, and it certainly couldn't be the American politicians. They're not at fault. And it has to be somebody else, and that is why we have to prepare militarily, build up our military, blame everybody else for the problems that we have, and yet here at home is our responsibility, our moral, legal, and constitutional responsibility is to do one major thing, and that is protect liberty. If we did that, we would have a healthy economy. We could set a standard for the world. We could influence the world through emulation of a good system, through setting, standards and people doing this voluntarily, rather than believing that we are so great, that we are so impeccable that we can spread our goodness around the world, and it's worth taking a risk and using our weapons and sanctions and occupations and doing all these things to force people to accept the views that we have. No, I think the only way you spread good ideas is to practice what we preach and let somebody else say, that looks like a good idea. We ought to do more of that ourselves. Want to thank everybody today for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Go check them out. Now, when we look at the economic stance that China has been able to do, and it seems what they're now doing with their military. They built ghost cities. They've created an economy out of basically what we do, print money. But in this sense, they do kind of do more of a socialism thing where they have ghost cities that are kept clean, that are kept up. Ghost cities with fountains in them and malls that are completely empty, but maybe 1 or 2 stores with fountains, and everything's kept up. People are getting paid to clean places that people don't use. So there's some sense of money being spread around, but again, they're just printing it, manipulation of the money. One thing China has, they've been buying the hell out of some gold. And Russia, has been said to be buying up gold too. And looking at trading oil in China's new currency, and you look at the economic stance and you're like, they still probably won't be able to knock us out with that alone. Well, probably not. But one thing we kind of forget is the TPP. This will hurt America, potentially. Extremely hurt America. From everything that I've heard and seen of the TPP, what this is the beginning of the EU. And, we've heard a lot of different people talk about this. Excuse me. With the TPP, it creates a court system that allows the corporations to go after governments, but not vice versa, which is a lot like the EU. Corporations are helping write this, and what this is going to do is allow them, just like NAFTA, allow the corporations to have more free range of taking manufacturing other places. Now, I've heard people go, the proponents of it go, it'll make every nation have a minimum wage. Well, a lot of these nations already have a minimum wage. A hell of a lot lower than ours. And if we raise ours, then, well, even bigger gap. They try to hide this because it really takes our sovereignty away. And I want to try to find this one clip. Let me see if I can. I do have a clip I played for you guys a year ago from AMTV, but I was hoping to find this other one first. Give me a second here. Okay. Okay. This one here, I have a few of them, but I really want to play this one, which was a week ago from We Are Change, what you need to know about the TPP. Let's go ahead and cue this one up here. I want to cover a little bit of this, and then I might pull up the other clip from We Are Change. Let me get past this quick ad here. Okay. Okay, We Are Change, what you need to know about the TPP. Trans-Pacific Partnership.
What is the TPP, who supports it, and why does it matter? The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a trade deal between 12 Pacific Rim nations that make up 40% of the world's economy. It includes countries such as the US, Mexico, Japan, and Vietnam, while excluding countries such as China and Russia. Some consumer groups have referred to the TPP as NAFTA on steroids. The deal will set a new international standard for everything from food safety to employment to international property regulations. While it has been in negotiations for several years, the full text of the TPP was kept secret up until last November. President Obama has been a big proponent of the TPP during his time in office, claiming that it will create jobs, strengthen U.S. leadership, and keep China from controlling the global economy.
Without this agreement, competitors that don't share our values, like China, will write the rules of the global economy. They'll keep selling into our markets and trying to lure companies over there. Meanwhile, they're going to keep their markets close to us. That's what's been going on for the last 20 years.
So what do the 2016 presidential candidates think about this deal? Donald Trump has been critical of the TPP, calling it a job killer that was promoted by special interest.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership is another disaster, done and pushed by special interests who want to rape our country. Just a continuing rape of our country. That's what it is, too. It's a harsh word. It's a rape of our country. This is done by wealthy people that want to take advantage of us.
Bernie Sanders has rallied against the deal, questioning why the TPP is the answer now when other trade deals haven't worked in the past.
But when we went forward with NAFTA, went forward with CAFTA, went forward with permanent normal trade relations, and we heard all of these folks telling us how great these agreements were going to be, and it turned out that virtually everything that they said was inaccurate, not true. Why in God's name would we go forward with another trade agreement, which is in fact larger than previous trade agreements.
Green Party nominee Jill Stein is also against the TPP, and she pointed out one very important provision that would give corporations the power to circumvent U.S. courts. It's called the Investor-State Dispute Settlement, or ISDS, and it has also been criticized by organizations such as the Electronic Freedom Foundation and WikiLeaks. It creates a special court where corporations can sue states and then receive taxpayer compensation for expected future profits. So who supports the TPP other than Obama? Libertarian nominee Gary Johnson told Politico in June that he believes the TPP is laden with crony capitalism. He then added to his answer in July, telling CNN that from what he has heard, he would sign it.
These trade agreements can be laden with crony capitalism, but based on people that have been advising me that I hold in very high esteem, I'm being told that the Trans-Pacific Partnership would in fact advance free trade, and so I would support that document.
Then there's Hillary Clinton. She initially praised the TPP in 2012.
This TPP sets the gold standard in trade agreements to open, free, transparent, fair trade.
She then changed her tune in 2015 and said she couldn't support the deal in its current form.
What I know about it as of today, I am not in favor of what I have learned about it.
Her current stance won't be her final stance, according to Clinton's longtime friend, Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. He said at the DNC that while Clinton would like to change parts of the deal, she would end up supporting it if elected. McAuliffe later said he was wrong and that Clinton will always oppose the TPP. The interesting thing about Clinton's change of heart is that her vice presidential candidate, Tim Kaine, also flip-flopped on the same issue. As a senator in Virginia, Kaine was one of 13 Senate Democrats who voted to give Obama fast-track authority on the TPP last year. However, after discussing the issue with Clinton, he now says he is also against the deal in its current form. Ultimately, the largest trade deal in history, which is over 5,500 pages long, raises some serious questions, not just about who supports it, but about which countries it excludes and which freedoms it is willing to give away.
Now, again, that was We Are Change, wearechange.org, We Are Change on YouTube. Now, one thing that's not really understood, people are like, well, if a business can sue a government, wouldn't that be good? Well, aren't we taking power away from government? And yeah, wouldn't that be good if you could actually have a true free trade where government can't get in the way? You can sue government when they get in the way. But see, that's really a disconnect from what all of this language is meaning and how this can backfire. Because it does not take the power away from the government when it comes to your rights. It actually empowers government to abridge the rights of its citizens. An example could be a journalist exposes a foreign corporation. The foreign corporation doesn't like it. The foreign corporation takes it to what again? A foreign court. The foreign court decides, well, you shouldn't print anything that could be hateful, when really you were maybe exposing something criminal. But they claim that your article was just so hateful against that corporation. People make mistakes. Well, then the foreign court is basically overseeing a case between that corporation and not particularly the journalist, but the U.S. government. Therefore, then the U.S. government starts clamping down on journalism that might be hateful or offensive. Again, from what I've heard, it's around, what was that again? Around 10 to 15% of the TPP is really about trade. The rest of it's agreements between the countries. And again, taking sovereignty away, it would basically be Congress giving their authority away, which they've done it in the past. But what it does is truly gives the sovereignty away. They can come after the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, the Fourth, Fifth, right down the line. They really can basically be the puppet master to all these countries' governments. Again, this people were talking about the North American Union when you had NAFTA. NAFTA was the beginning. Just like they've done more than one trade deal before they created the EU. The EU was created out of these exact same type of trade deals. Look at the trade deals that led to the creation of the EU. Then look at NAFTA, and then look at TPP. We are on that same path. After we have watched a Brexit and many other countries wanting out, definitely a lot of the citizens of those countries, and we see how it's failing, especially within those countries. I've heard people talk about how, people felt like they were just a cog in the machine during the Industrial Revolution. Well, I see that somewhere, and there was also people that were seeing technology grow and were enthusiastic about it. Again, I really don't see that part changes. To create TVs, it's not like you have, a couple people every few blocks making TVs in their garage. A lot of what we enjoy, you have that. But if you look at Europe right now, it seems to be starting to go back, unless you just create something that's just spectacular, and a lot of times it's electronic, and it also has the dual use of being able to control people. But you look at it, and it seems like we've gone to medieval times where, you're born in this, middle class or, top end poverty, and that's what you can expect. And there was a point where you actually seen a lot of people in Europe start, creating for themselves. And it was a good sign. And people go, see, socialism working. But what they didn't realize, they were moving away from a capitalist market that was allowing that to happen. A free market capitalist. And capitalism isn't big business. Capitalism can refer to you as an individual being a capitalist, wanting to create and create and create and build and contribute to the future. There's a line between capitalism, crony capitalism. You can't be a free market capitalist. Okay, I do want to move on here. Give me a second here. Okay. Okay, my computer froze up. Let me reopen this browser. I get too many tabs open and browser likes to crash. Okay. Got the browser back up here. Now, I want to see if I can find this article about the TPP before I move on. And I guess it's not going to work. Okay. Well, we'll just move on, but I want people to really pay attention. We know how a lot of these things do get passed. It's under the cover of darkness or with other scandals or whatever going on in the media to really kind of overshadow them passing this, and then we find out about it later. We know this is their technique that they use over and over and over. So we have to be aware of what's going on. Again, that's why I tell people be prepared, because they may pass that next NAFTA on steroids, which that's what they're calling this. That can potentially hurt our economy to a point that it wouldn't be hard for China to come in afterwards and finish us off. Thing is, will we be able to leech off many of these other countries? And I think that's a far cry. We've seen what's happened with the EU, and you can't manage markets the way they want to. They try to manage markets, keep people happy so they can have the power, but they always create turmoil, and people wake up pretty fast. But it does create chaos. And with the TPP open borders, you better believe that's going to come with the TPP. They will open the borders because it will be an obstacle for business. Talking about tariffs and all this, only with the countries that aren't a part of the pact. Okay, I want to move on to something that if I can get it here. Okay. Now, I kind of want to get into the 2016 election here. It's you have Hillary now coming out against the TPP. You've had Trump come out from the beginning against TPP. What really irritates me is Gary Johnson. These people I trust. Well, I have people that I trust and people I don't trust all coming out against it and saying the same thing. What is in the text of the TPP? And I've read little clips of it, what information's out there. And it's the whole system is really set up to take away sovereignty and put it into this arbitrary court, which it'll be a court right now, but eventually it'll be like the leadership of the EU, and then the representatives of the countries will be the lawyer or the defendant, basically. Just wait if this passes. And Hillary is a globalist. So I do see her supporting this. And she hasn't seemed to really be too concerned about our national security. And that kind of also leads to that globalism, not really a sovereign person. Doesn't look at the U.S. as sovereign. No big deal that she isn't protecting national security because, well, we want a global security anyways. Well, apparently, Iran has executed a scientist spy that was in a Clinton email. And I wasn't really planning on doing this, but I couldn't find the article I had up earlier. So I'm just going to queue up this Ron Paul Liberty report, and we'll cover it after this. Hopefully I can find that article. Okay, that was kind of weird. Hopefully I'm still here. Okay. Iran executes scientist spy. What's Hillary's role?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is co-host Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, I understand you might have a few announcements for us today.
Sure. Good morning, Dr. Paul. First, happy Monday. I just wanted a couple of quick announcements. I wanted to remind our viewers that the Ron Paul Liberty Report is being sponsored by Camino Coin. Camino Coin is where Ron Paul buys his gold. You can find an ad on our website, ronpaullibertyreport.com, with the telephone number. If you call Camino, tell them Ron Paul sent you. The other thing that we'd like to do, really, Dr. Paul, is we'd like to recognize the people who watch the live stream of our show every day. And there are many people, it's almost like a club, that watch the show live every day. And we really appreciate you watching. There is a very vigorous chat that goes on during the show, a live chat that goes on. And we look at this feed every day, and we appreciate your comments, your criticisms, and your compliments. And please keep doing it, and tell your friends to watch the live stream show as well. So
okay, very, very good. Thank you, Daniel. As our title announces, we're going to talk about Iran. We're going to be talking first about, the individual who was executed just a few days ago by the Iranians, who they said was an American spy, and I'm not sure we'll ever find out exactly what it was, whether he was a spy or whether he was a double agent or whatnot. But anyway, the significance of this is that have been some emails revealed. And guess where they came from? They came from that secret server that was just deleting those family issues. But it turns out that there was something in Hillary's email that actually showed that our CIA was dealing with this particular individual. And the question is, could this information that had been revealed be the evidence that the Iranian governments needed to confirm the fact that he was actually an American spy and giving out secrets, which would lead to his death? And that seems like a plausible argument, but this would not only have a significance diplomatically, but it seems like there could be some political significance here, and yet Hillary's been involved in political problems and a lot of charges made, but she seems to be able to escape the arm of the law. So I don't know. What do you think about what's going on here?
I think even if there is not a direct connection proven, I think the fact that these emails were not secure, anyone could have gotten a hold of them, and she discussed something so sensitive as a potential U.S. asset involved in Iran, really undermines her point that this is no big deal. There was nothing secret in here. We didn't do anything that affected national security. It shows such a cavalier attitude toward, and I know you want more transparency in government, and we all do. But there are sometimes, for example, in a case like this, where you do need to have some government secrecy.
Right. And some people in this country has reacted, this really shows you what kind of people the Iranians are. And it might reveal a little bit because me personally, I have not accepted the death penalty. At one time I did. Now I think the government's too inept at doing this. So I have no desire to promote the death penalty. But some people, are rather critical of this. But, all I would say to them, compared to what? You want to hit the Iranians now for invoking the death penalty for an individual who may not have been a major threat to anybody in particular. But, I think they're an ally. It's called Saudi Arabia. I think they believe in the death penalty. And sometimes they invoke the death penalty by beheading. And I don't think you have to commit a capital crime to get the death penalty. Sometimes it can be for subjective or religious reasons, but I don't hear much in our media about the beheadings and the executions by our Saudi government friends.
Yeah, that's special. But Iran does execute a lot of people every year, and I feel the same way as you do about the death penalty. It's the government is too inept to undertake that task. However, as you point out, the Saudis do it. It's done elsewhere. And look at the U.S. We don't have much room to talk when we have the highest incarceration rate in the world. That may not include the death penalty. We certainly do our share of death penalty. But the other point, and I know you have some thoughts on this. What about all the Americans, including some political leaders, who say that Ed Snowden should be executed for what he did, which is to tell us the evil that our government's been doing?
Yeah, and in that message, sometimes those comments are made, and I always want to give people the benefit of the doubt, and maybe they're careless and they don't really mean it and this sort of thing, but it doesn't matter. When that message gets out, people who understand that Edward Snowden is somebody who's trying to tell us the truth about what's happening, and then they want to call him a spy or a traitor, and he should be executed. That doesn't go over so well anyway. But I think this is messy stuff. I think it could really, go back to haunting Hillary once again. I know there's been a lot of charges about it, but this seems like it would confirm the fact that her carelessness or her ineptness and her desire to hide things is serious enough where other countries get it. And if it led to the point of a government using this evidence, for an execution, you would think it would wake some people up. But I doubt if much will happen between now and the election regarding this.
Well, there are no great alternatives, at least in the main two parties. So I think that the lines are probably already drawn.
Right. There was another subject dealing with those Iranians, Iranians, and that has to do with cash for hostages. And that was big in the news over the weekend. $400 million. I guess we wrote them a check or sent them some treasury bills for this. No, lo and behold, $400 million in cash.
Wow.
I'm always amazed at some of these transactions. When they get serious, they want cash. And maybe the instincts of some Americans when they worry about their own government, they want cash because they don't trust the banks. But in this case, $400 million in cash was delivered. And then the anti-Iranians who despise the agreement with the Iranians to open the door, which so far looks like it's working well and nobody's charging them with breaking this, but they hate it and they want to destroy it. So they jumped on it and said, this was $400 billion to pay ransom for these hostages. But when we've dug into this, I think we find pretty good evidence to show that it doesn't have much to do with a payment for hostages. Maybe some political grandstanding, but not a quid pro quo.
Well, Iran also has to placate its hawks. And as we talked about before the show, it's very possible that the Iranian government let it be seen that there was some sort of a relationship between the money and the release of the hostages to show the hawks, see, we can get something out of the Americans too. But in fact, what it was actually, President Obama had announced back in January that we're going to start giving you some of your money back that we took from you. And it was a great article in Vox about this whole thing. And he may have actually saved us a lot of money because we were involved in a lawsuit. U.S. was involved in a lawsuit with Iran over some weapons that we did not deliver because the '79 revolution intervened. And they had sued, it was $400 million. They had sued the U.S. for $10 billion, all of these years later. And according to the article, it looked like we may have lost this lawsuit. So it sounds like they kind of got in and said, okay, we'll give you some money to kind of mitigate this $10 billion. It may have just been a smart move.
Yeah, and I wonder if maybe our government might have even made the argument, well, all right, we're coming through, we're going to pay off, and this is what we're going to do. How are we going to finalize this deal? And it might have been the Americans say, well, we want to look like we're doing some good, releasing, these hostages. And of course, the Iranians said, okay, you got to deliver it in cash. And they had this, and it was trying to serve their political interests in each country. But, once it was realized that when the nuclear deal was made, that the Iranians were going to get a lot of money, but the media hardly ever talked about whether they're going to get some of their own money back. Yeah. And I made a comment to you about, it all started with Ike. What do you mean? How could it have started with Ike? This thing has gone on because the hostages wouldn't have been taken if we hadn't thrown out Mossadegh, in 1953. So this stuff lingers on. And then if we had not had the hostages back then we wouldn't have had the excuse to steal so much money from them and put it in the bank. But it just goes on. And then those who like confrontation, for the various reasons, they can't stand the idea, and I used to ridicule them by saying, they're terrified that peace may break out, But I think it involves a lot of misunderstanding of the people that we're dealing with, but also misjudging the willingness of some people in Iran that are willing to actually change. I mean, they're not like the most anti-Western country in the world. Nobody can prove that they're the most anti-Christian country in the world. I would think the Christians have been traditionally treated better there than, say, in Saudi Arabia.
Certainly in Jews as well. There's the largest Jewish community in the Middle East outside of Israel is in Iran. But they concentrate on the other things.
thinking about this and money, I got to thinking about some of the questions that were raised back in during the Iraqi War, and how much money transpired back then. It wasn't $400 million, and it wasn't $2 billion. And they were talking about $40 billion.
Wow.
In cash that they were hauling back and forth, and but they said, well, it was all the Iranians' money. But do you think the Iraqis' money? Which Iraqis? Which government? Oh, we're going to return it now because we own the government. You know, we go in there and take over their country. We have a provisional government, so we decide to send this back. What would your guess be on why this always has to be done in cash? This is positively amazing. Maybe it's just the record keeping that doesn't have to be kept.
I guess with the dollar as the world reserve currency, it's probably the most liquid asset you could imagine. A big handful of cash or truck full of cash.
Right. You know, in going back and looking at this, I came across an article in 2011, and it was a summary of how this cash transaction occurred in Iraq. And we accidentally came across a driver by the name of Basil. That was his first name, but he was being interviewed in 11 after all that hauling of money back and forth. But he came to be the individual in charge of driving the trucks through and delivering it to the individuals that's supposed to have it. But it was interesting that at that particular time, he was asked about this, and he said, well, I'm on my way to Sudan. This is in 2011. I'm on my way to Sudan because I'm getting ready to have another contract for carrying cash into Libya.
Wow.
So is this just routine practice? And still, once again, where do they get this cash? The Federal Reserve is always involved. Whether or not they manage to just steal it from the people and print the money and all, or whether they technically are using cash that they confiscated from these other countries before. But this whole idea that even in 2011, there was one estimate over this. They talk about 40 billion, and then you'll have an article, oh yes, we accounted for it. We sent an inspector over there and we accounted for it. Then somebody else came along, which is probably closer to the truth, that between 30 and $60 billion was lost through fraud. You know, whether it was cash or not fraud. How about the rebuilding? It probably was no better in Afghanistan.
And where are the progressives and the fiscal conservatives on this issue? You know, some progressives are with us, but there should be more of them, because a progressive would say these billions of dollars going to corrupt figures overseas, they could be used for school, for infrastructure, what have you. What about the so-called fiscal conservatives in the Republican Party? They both shut up because they like this interventionist foreign policy. You know, but one thought I had while you were talking about this Libya thing, this would have been right after the overthrow of Gaddafi that we were going to send these truckloads of money in. But as we know, the people who took over for Gaddafi ended up being actually radical Islamists, you know, Al-Qaeda linked figures in Benghazi and what have you. How many of these billions of dollars went to fuel their ongoing war in the Middle East?
And that article described it. After the liberation of Libya, he was hired out. They were talking about hiring him out and sending more money in. And it probably is accepted practice. I guess the amazing thing that the dollar can withstand all of this. But in a way, if they take dollars, literally taking dollars and keep them over there and use them, it sort of takes the money supply away from where it might have had the ill effects of pumping up the inflation of prices here in this country. That would hardly be the excuse. It might be just an explanation on why it is temporary. Because once the confidence is lost in a dollar, whether it's computer money or whether it's cash itself, it literally loses value. And of course, the more you do, the worse the bubble is, and the worse the problems on the correction.
So exporting inflation by regime change and all these sorts of things.
Yeah, well, this is why we've been able to get away with so much of it. We do export our inflation. The people who complain about those dirty Chinese, beating us on our trade agreements and all this, actually, we print the world currency. this is legitimate, it's out in the open, the Fed creates it, and everybody's happy about it, the banks are happy, and then actually the consumer on the short run benefits because this money goes out to look for cheaper products, and it happens to be China. So we export this money, and then the Chinese actually monetize the dollars that we send over there. So we get cheap products coming in here. They buy up our debt, and they finance us to the tune that we owe them over $1 trillion, and then all of it is blamed on the Chinese, for it. So it's we can literally export inflation, but if you do export it, eventually it'll come back to haunt us, and I think that's what we're on the verge of doing.
And think about what a reprehensible foreign policy this is. We go and we invade and we bomb and we overthrow a government, spending billions of dollars doing that, and then we send billions of dollars on truckloads to pay the new government that we put in power, And one of the themes that we've hit on a lot on the show is that our foreign policy is not only immoral, it's a rip-off. It's ripping off the middle class. We know the middle class is being destroyed, and this is one of the reasons, and I wish more Americans would wake up to what's being done with their dollars and in their name.
Yeah, I would think that this is a ripe time for our message. Just hope we do a better job in getting it out. Because the middle class, if they understood the connection with what you're talking about, the connection between the military budget, militarism around the world, the American empire, and all that happens and how that affects the economy back here. And we get some support from progressives because they think if we don't spend as much money overseas, you can put it all in the welfare budget. But you don't have to do that to help the middle class. The middle class would be helped if you just quit that kind of stuff, and they should support it. And I think most of them would. But here we've gone through this election, but we don't really have a champion out there talking about why the middle class is really suffering. We ended up with a Bernie Sanders saying, yeah, I understand your pain, and what we need to do is make sure there's no rich people left and taxes go up, and this would solve the problem. And others would say, well, if we just have a fancy old-fashioned trade war and make sure that nobody sells us cheap products anymore, everything is going to be hunky-dory. And they miss the whole concept of how markets work and what sound money is like and how detrimental the Federal Reserve and the central banking system is. But we could look to Europe. Brexit wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to letting people know what was going on.
Yeah, we need some Brexits of our own.
There you go. We could think of many. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. I know this subject sometimes seems a little complex to sort out all the pieces, but first off, we do think it's very significant that the emails that probably came from Hillary's email indicates that we were very much involved in talking to and working with the quote spy that was executed in Iran, and the significance there is whether or not these emails was used by the Iranian government as evidence against this person. This to me should be very significant, but I'm also saying due to my cynicism of how things have worked out in the past, not much will change. But the whole thing is rather cynical about how we do invade countries, occupy countries, we bomb and kill and blow up bridges, and then we rebuild them, and then all we get is more fraud and waste and abuse and more debt. And there are some people who think we should rebuild our bridges. I happen to think if there were more money left in this country, instead of bombing bridges overseas and then rebuilding them overseas and then developing a corrupt system, that yes, we would be able to take care of our infrastructure, we'd be able to take care of the middle class, and we'd be able to rout out the crony capitalists who pretend that they're very important people, and yet they're nothing more than in cahoots with a government that serves the interests of some very special groups. I want to thank everybody today for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Now, when we look at the Hillary thing. We already know the whole email scandal and how, well, basically you break the law as long as you're, elitist, want Hillary. And, oh, well, she deleted emails, but they were personal ones. They had nothing to do. How do we know that she deleted them? We don't know that they weren't work related. Well, her lawyers deleted them, and they wiped the devices to the point that nothing could ever be recovered. Well, if they were personal emails, why would they need to be wiped to that extreme? We're not talking about classified information. We're talking about personal information. Oh, personal information is way above the classified information when you're Secretary of State. Again, if you did something like that, that would be tampering with evidence to, oh, they were only personal. Well, we don't know that because you deleted them. That would be what you would get for doing the same thing. But it's okay. And then on top of that, and then, the scientist / spy gets executed. Top of that, we give them, $400 million. It's supposed to be, what was it, 1.7 million or something on top of, I can't remember right off bat. I couldn't find the article I was looking for on Hillary, and I forgot to even try to pull that up. We paid interest. Hold on, we didn't send the weapons because we had a extremist revolution where the extremist people won, so we didn't send them. Okay, I can see we owe them that money back. But if it's a radical government, let's put Hitler in the place of Iran. Would we have wanted to send weapons or even the money back to someone like Hitler, knowing who they are? Knowing what they've said? And we paid interest? Something that's not really being talked about in mainstream media. But it should be. And I one thing I don't agree with Ron Paul with is the whole the money wasn't a ransom payment. I'm not going to say 100% that was a ransom payment. I'm not going to say that, but let me see if I can find this little clip. Hopefully I can find it. Let me see if I can find it here. I'm hoping I can find it here. Okay. Let me play this here. And this is Fox News interviews one of the Iranian hostages about the night the hostages were released. Let me play this real quick.
Ago, I spoke with one of the hostages, one of the American hostages who had been held there in Iran, and he told me that they were brought that evening to the airport, and they were told it would be about 20 minutes, and you're going to take off, and you're going to go home. And he said 20 minutes turned into an hour. They wound up waiting most of the night. He said they even slept there at the airport because they were repeatedly told, you cannot take off, we cannot take off until the other plane arrives. He didn't know what the other plane was, of course, but they also said that you're not going to take off until that other plane arrives. Of course, a lot of people questioning, including Chairman Royce, Ed Royce of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, just exactly what that other plane was. And, you know, I'll ask you, I mean, what is your interpretation of what he's saying there?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you on getting that interview. Because what you have done is what nobody else has been able to do, Trish. You have shown that there is a causal relationship between the money being delivered and the hostages being released. So when the president comes out in a few minutes and people are going to ask him, well, what about that $400 million that arrived on an unmarked plane in the dead of the night in unmarked currencies, you know, foreign currencies, and it was offloaded by Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Is there any connection to that and the release of the hostages? And the president will stand there and say, absolutely not. It's just a coincidence.
Now, let me see if I can actually find the clip. Okay, here it is.
Oh.
Now, hold on. Here it is.
Out of your prison and brought you to an airport?
Yeah, we were at the airport for a night, and, you know, they told us...
You slept there at the airport?
Minutes. Yes, for a night. And, you know, they told us, you're going to be there for 20 minutes, but it took like hours and hours. We slept at the airport, and when I asked them why you don't let us go, because the plane was there, pilot was there, everyone was ready that we leave the country, they said we are waiting for another plane, and until that plane doesn't come, we never let you go.
So he said, look, we were there, we were waiting, we were all set ready to go, but we couldn't take off because they kept telling us we had to wait for another plane to come.
And what plane was that? Maybe, the money plane, because if that other plane doesn't arrive, we won't let you go. Sounds like they were waiting for their payment. So, to say it wasn't a ransom payment, well, maybe not. Hey, you know, we will pay $400. No, it wasn't like that. It was one of those, though, if you don't give us our money, they're not getting released. It was one of those. So it's one of those, we'll put this in the gray area, so it's a loophole. It's a ransom payment. Definitely when you're paying interest. And I still think it's a bad idea. But, okay, at least give them what they gave us. Give them that money back. No interest. Release the hostages. Okay. Now, listen to the reporters and Josh Earnest going over this $400 million.
Why not do it yourself? With Wix, it's easy to create your own stunning website.
We have often found that it is not helpful to name them, to detail them, to identify them specifically. So let me just say that we have continuing, long-standing concerns with Iran's treatment of American citizens in Iran. And that is why an agreement, again, announced back in January that prevented Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, that reached a financial settlement to save the American people potentially billions of dollars, and secure the release of 5 Americans that had been unjustly detained in Iran, was hailed as such a positive, beneficial outcome for the United States. But let me be clear, the United States does not pay ransoms. The only person that's making that accusation, at least included in the Wall Street Journal story that we're talking about, is some Iranian official.
No, it's actually Paul Ryan's doing now.
They are now. So it sounds to me like they are once again in a position where they're making the same argument as hardliners in Iran in an effort to undermine the Iran nuclear agreement. The president made clear a year ago that right-wingers in the United States were making common cause with right-wingers in the Iranian government. And again, if they're doing it again to try to justify their opposition to an agreement that has benefited the American people, they can do that, but I think that's going to be pretty hard for them to explain. Maybe there's another letter from Senator Cotton to the Supreme Leader we don't know about.
Can you confirm or deny that the money arrived the day the Americans left?
I can't confirm the details of the specific transaction.
Say anything about the remaining balance of this hundreds of millions of dollars that the United States has agreed to pay to settle the tribunal issue?
What I can't provide a specific update for you in terms of the transaction. I can tell you when the United States makes a commitment, we're good for our word and we live up to the terms of the agreement that we signed on to. Okay, Margaret.
Josh, I think a lot of us reported on the transfer at the time, $400 million from the Iranian account, $1.3 from taxpayers coming from the Treasury. But in terms of the logistics of this, there are some in Congress, including Ed Royce, who's written and exchanged letters from the State Department asking for more granularity on that.
Avowed opponent of the Iran deal, continuing to try to justify his opposition to this agreement.
As you would say, these are actually 3 separate deals. This isn't about the nuclear accord. This isn't about the prisoners you're arguing. This is its own deal. So if we put those 2 aside and we just focus on this deal, specifically with the money transfer, will you be providing that detail to Congress, knowing that you can't tell us from the podium, as you just said?
Well, again, we'll continue to engage with members of Congress about this. I think what is true, and I think would certainly account for the descriptions that were included in the newspaper today, is that the United States does not have a banking relationship with Iran. And the reason for that is because of this administration's commitment to ensuring that we continue to hold Iran accountable for a variety of activities that we are deeply concerned about.
So that's logical in terms of not refuting the idea that it had to be a cash payment since there weren't any banking accounts, and that now that the banking system's a little less clogged, you could find other ways to pay, so maybe the timing suggests, once again, it's around the same time. Do you understand that? I'm sure you appreciate that without the clarity on this, the innuendo and the optics make it tough. So to truly kill that idea and the allegations being made of a ransom payment. So again, why not provide that detail of exactly how the money was received?
Right. I actually don't think that there's a lot of rationality in the argument that you've outlined that is being made by hard right-wing officials in Iran and Republican critics of the deal.
Don't need to know how the $1.3 billion of their money was given.
No. I'm talking about as it relates to this suggestion that somehow this was a ransom payment, that this is somehow connected to other elements of the deal. The only people who are making that suggestion are right-wingers in Iran who don't like the deal and Republicans in the United States that don't like the deal.
It's very easy for you to kill that argument by saying this is exactly how it happened and why, not just trust us, there's nothing shady about a plane arriving in the middle of the night loaded with cash, which is, you're saying it's innuendo, right? You're saying there's something that was done that was not above board.
I think Margaret, I guess the point that I'm trying to make, Margaret, is we could not possibly have been more transparent about this arrangement than to have the President of the United States announce it to all of you on live national television on the day that the agreement was reached.
The agreement was reached and the intent to pay the $1.7 billion, yes. But the details, you're saying yourself, it's new detail in an old story. Yeah. I guess clarifying the detail is what would help.
But why is that relevant? Why is that relevant? Particularly when we all know that there's no banking relationship between the United States and Iran. So again,
cash transfer.
Yeah, I understand. Again, I understand the political attacks that are being made by people who are trying to justify their opposition to our engagement with Iran.
$1.3 billion is taxpayer money. So don't people have a right to have an answer to that question?
Again, that's why we announced it, as you point out, back in January.
The details of that.
So,
and
what are the details?
From the trust fund to this bank, or it had to be in euros and francs because we don't have a banking relationship because it's complicated. That would be a really simple thing that people would be able to follow.
Yeah. So look, I guess none of what you have walked through changes the basic facts here. We acknowledged, again, back on January 17th, that there would be all kinds of innuendo hurled by people who oppose engagement with Iran. Republicans in the United States who oppose engagement with Iran. I recognize that the details that you're seeking to elicit might make for a colorful news story, but they don't change the facts. They don't actually change any sort of innuendo that's going to be lobbed by critics of the deal about our intent. They certainly are not going to effectively convince, again, a right-winger in Iran who's seeking some kind of propaganda victory.
He will not answer the question, nor will he say, yeah, maybe that would be a good idea for us to do. Instead, he's saying, why would you want us to give that information out? You're feeding into the propaganda. Let us leave this information private. Our eyes only. Like, really? But just put it out there, that way there can't be a conspiracy. How? Why would I do that?
In the pages of the Wall Street Journal, from basically making a false claim that this somehow is a ransom payment. What I can tell you is that the United States, when we make an agreement, we live up to it. We announced the terms of this agreement back in January. The reason we announced the terms of the agreement, in part, is because we have a desire to be transparent with the American people. We also have a desire to advocate for the fact that because of this smart agreement, the American people potentially saved billions of dollars.
So you see this as completely politically motivated.
Again, the facts of this case, the facts of this situation, and the benefits of this situation have been known for more than 6 months now. You all have been reporting on it for more than 6 months ago. Again, not because of some secret anonymous leak in the bowels of some government bureaucracy, but because the United States of America announced it on live television from the White House.
I know, we've all been covering it, but the thing that's new is the detail that you're saying is irrelevant, and that's why it becomes.
Well, I recognize it's my job to answer the questions up here, but I will acknowledge I don't understand, other than for the fact that it makes for a colorful lead. I'll concede that. But it doesn't change the facts of the situation. It doesn't change anybody's assessment about the motive of the United States. Whether or not this was wired from one particular U.S. government account to some Iranian government account, as opposed to delivered on pallets, that's not going to change the argument of Paul Ryan and Marco Rubio that they're opposed to the deal. It's not going to change the propaganda efforts of the... they're opposed because they are.
You're saying you're not linked.
Because they are. I'm saying... The argument that they're making that is false, that has been proven wrong time and time again, is not going to change based on whether this was wired or delivered in paper currency. So so I understand the interest in details for a more colorful story, but I don't understand what this does to the broader outlines of an argument that have been in place for 6 months now. Republicans have lost that argument. Critics of the deal have lost this argument because we have succeeded in preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. We did succeed in securing the release of 5 Americans who are unjustly detained overseas in Iran, and we did succeed in saving the American taxpayers potentially billions of dollars by reaching a long-standing financial settlement with the Iranians over their money.
You're just arguing that it's all worth it, basically. That
it's all. I think again.
The details don't matter on this, is what you're saying.
No, I've not been quoted saying that, and I wouldn't be quoted saying that. I think what I'm saying is, it doesn't change the contours of the argument. The argument that is being made by Republicans is they're struggling to justify their opposition to our engagement with Iran. They've lumped it all together. We've made clear time and time again that we capitalize on this opening with Iran to try to settle this variety of claims. And there is no disputing, despite the best efforts of right-wingers in Iran and right-wingers in the United States, that we have prevented Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. They have rolled back key aspects of their program. We did secure the release of 5 Americans, and we have settled a long-standing financial claim in a way that benefits the American people, potentially saving billions of dollars.
And lastly, nothing like this will happen to secure the release of the 4 Americans or U.S. residents who some of their families have said are being held in Iran, and the Iranians have said they're being held. I know you can't talk to the specific cases.
Well, what I will say is that the United States, under President Obama, has not paid a ransom to secure the release of Americans unjustly detained in Iran, and we're not going to pay a ransom. If there are Americans who are unjustly detained in Iran, we will make a case regularly through some now established channels with Iran to advocate for their release. Okay. Scott.
This financial dispute you mentioned has been going on for 35 years. Why was it necessary to airlift in the pallets of cash on the very weekend of the American first release?
Again, Scott, the reason is simple. The United States does not have a banking relationship with Iran.
That explains that it was cash, but doesn't explain the timing.
Because we reached the agreement, and Iran wanted their money back. So again,
They waited 35 years.
Right. So you might expect that they would be eager for them to go through. The military equipment wasn't provided. So again, you can understand why they're quite eager for the money. You also would understand that they're quite eager for the money when you consider that the value of their currency is plummeted, that they haven't been able to invest in infrastructure, that they've got debts that need to be paid, and that they're in the middle of a recession. So at the time, they were eager to try to address the legitimate concerns of the
U.S. eager to deliver the money so quickly.
Well, again, I would not describe the United States as eager. I describe the Iranians as eager. I think what the United States is we're a country that lives up to the commitments that we make.
Yeah, tell that to the Native Americans.
And that's exactly what we did. Okay. Michelle.
So it's been called a ransom payment by Iran. That's not exactly surprising. But would those prisoners have been released had this payment not been made at the time that it would? So isn't it essentially a ransom payment then, even if the U.S. does not view it that way?
No, it is not a ransom payment. The United States does not view it that way, and it's not accurate to describe it that way.
So would those prisoners have been released then if this money hadn't been paid then?
Well, again, I think what is true is that there were a team of negotiators. Let me just start from the beginning. What I know is true is there were a team of negotiators in the United States that were interacting with Iranian officials to secure the release of 5 Americans who were unjustly detained in Iran. That negotiating work was successful, and those Americans are at home. There was a separate group of negotiators who are working through the Hague process for decades to try to reach an agreement, a settlement on these financial claims. And there is momentum in our relationship where we're closing out accounts. where we were resolving longstanding concerns. And in each case, the United States reached agreements and closed out accounts in a way that benefited the American people. And what
what it sounds like to me, what he's saying right there is we rushed the payment to ensure that we'll get these hostages released right away. They wanted something to show. And instead they got a controversy. They wanted the payment to arrive in the dead of night, and they wanted to showcase the hostages getting released. But the Iranians had a different thing. They put the photos of the money coming in pallets, and it was exposed. Would the money have gone there? Would they have sent the money there at a slower rate if it wasn't for the hostages? Or would, at all, would they have delivered money to Iran if there wasn't hostages? Yes, probably. Because, again, this was something that was settled in the courts and the agreement, and, they were going for $10 billion. They got 1.7 on $400 million. Save the tax dollars. No, you go, listen, you're getting your $400 million back, accept it. But, okay, 1.7 instead of 10. They would have never got 10. I don't believe that you would have seen it go in the dead of night on pallets the way it did if it wasn't for needing to rush it, because until it arrived, they were not going to release the hostages. And it kind of sounds like that's what he's saying here. I want to play just, maybe. Just a little bit more of this here.
Typically, their government seems to be kidnapping Americans.
Oh, okay.
Captive come home. The winsome appearance of payment goes out, people who are held captive come home. Maybe it was just timing, granted, but would you at least acknowledge that it doesn't look great?
Kevin, if that was a legitimate concern, it is a concern that would have been raised 6 months ago when we originally announced it. That's why I'm quite skeptical. Integrity of the reaction that we've seen from people who have long been on the record of opposing our efforts to engage with Iran. And the fact is, despite their opposition and despite their criticism, we have succeeded in rolling back key aspects of Iran's nuclear program, in preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, in securing the release of 5 Americans who are unjustly detained in Iran, and settling a long-standing financial dispute in a way that potentially saves American taxpayers billions of dollars.
They keep plucking Iranian Americans. Do we have any of their citizens?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by saying have any of their citizens. There are any number of Iranian Americans in the United States.
No, I meant specifically, their government seems to be kidnapping Americans, kidnapping Iranian Americans over there. Are we doing anything in response to that?
Well, I can't speak to any individual case for the reasons that I outlined earlier. What is true is that when there were Americans who we believed were unjustly detained in Iran. Secretary Kerry acknowledged when he was having daily meetings with his Iranian counterpart in the context of the negotiations to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, he raised U.S. concerns about that unjust detention every single day. So this is the status of Americans held against their will around the world is a top priority of the U.S. government, there are significant efforts and significant resources that are committed to seeking the recovery of Americans who are unjustly held or held hostage around the world. Okay.
Thanks, Josh. If I can circle back to Iran briefly, is it your contention that it is not a ransom payment because there was no quid pro quo, or because it was Iranian money that was flowing?
It is our contention that there was no ransom paid to secure the release of U.S. citizens who are being unjustly detained in Iran, because A, it's against the policy of the U.S. government to pay ransoms, and that's something that we told the Iranians that we would not do. We would not, we have not, we will not pay a ransom to secure the release of U.S. citizens. That's a fact. That is our policy and is one that we have assiduously followed.
You said the timing, you refused to describe this as a coincidence also. Regardless of whether this was a ransom, was the timing a concession to allow the Iranian regime to save face or to gain a symbolic propaganda victory? Was that something that factored into the U.S. calculation?
We talked about this calculation back in January. And what we said back in January, I stood at this podium on January 19th and we talked about this. The timing is predicated on the ability to resolve a variety of concerns that we have with Iran. Iran was signing off on deals. And we got them to sign off on a deal that released 5 Americans who were unjustly detained in Iran. We got them to sign off on a deal that rolled back key aspects of their nuclear program and prevents them from obtaining a nuclear weapon. We got them to sign off on a deal that would resolve longstanding financial concerns, longstanding financial dispute. That returned $400 million of Iranian money, but that also saved U.S. taxpayers potentially billions in interest charges. So all that came to a head at the same time because we were focused on capitalizing on this opportunity to complete these agreements. And the benefits of those agreements are quite difficult to argue with. I recognize it doesn't prevent our critics from trying to do so in a partisan political way, but when it comes to our national security and when it comes to preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, when it comes to the safety of American citizens abroad, when it comes to saving taxpayers billions of dollars, those are the kinds of things that should rise above politics.
Switching topics, the president said in March at the South by Southwest festival about voter.
Okay. I'm going to stop it there. Now, he can sit there and beat around the bush. But at the same time, in a way, he basically was saying, well, the timing of all this, we planned this out. So he's basically saying the hostage release, the money being dropped off, and any other negotiations that they made would just be done all at the same time. And that's why they waited on the plane. They don't want to call it what it is because it's supposed to be against the policy. But it is what it is. And back to this interest. What interest? Why? Why interest? Did we not have a good reason? The government that gave us that money was not the government in charge. Was the government in charge a representative government of the people? If that's the people's money, and you don't believe that the government is a representative, more of a dictatorship, and the money won't ever go back to the people, and you don't want to give them guns, which we're not, we're giving them money, but interest, 400 million turned into 1.7 billion. Don't you feel bad that they had to wait all this time? Now, you know, I feel bad for the people of many countries and how their governments exploit them, including this one. And, you know, we're going to hear some people go, you know, why does this even matter? The truth matters. The truth in history matters. What we pass down to the generations after us matters. We must say it how it is. And what Josh Earnest seemed to be doing there is mincing words and using terminology to try to distance the truth of the situation from what they need you to call it, to believe it to be. And just like with the Clinton emails, she did do this, she did do that, we did find this, but, you know, we're not going to recommend charges. You basically indict someone and then say, we're not going to indict them. And the media really did actually go in pretty hard on Josh Earnest about it, and you could see the frustration. And again, from what I've seen in the video, he had to keep going back to these, you know, pre-scripted, you know, phrases. And it really, it's so scripted that you can't look at it and trust it. When you keep going back to the same terms and phrases, and it just reeks that, you know, you are mincing words and beating around the bush. Entangling alliances. We were warned about these. What are we to become as a people, as a nation? Are we going to become a free people? Are other countries going to become more of a free people rather than a nation? Will we actually be able to break down borders without creating a globalist power structure? A giant border? Because globalists, when you see sovereignty taken away by globalists, they're not taking away borders. They're just expanding a border around a bigger area. and controlling. And the bigger of an area that they grab, the more controlling and police state they have to become. And history has proven that. History has showed that. We have TPP, we have China, we have Russia. You know, we have our own government seeming to work against us for their globalist agenda. And when you go, oh, well, I'll go Libertarian Party. Gary Johnson has supported the TPP. He likes it. It's free market propaganda. I can't support someone that will support the TPP. Because, again, it's a globalist grab rather than a true free market. You know, at one point we had a true free market, that the border between the U.S. and Mexico was free to travel unchecked, that you could take goods across the border into Mexico and sell them, or bring goods back and sell them. And government didn't interfere on either side. It's not just here in America, it's globally that governments have gone back to more control. There was a point where there was freedom of travel, freedom of, association. I hope we can find that again. Here in the U.S., I hope the Mexicans can find it, the Canadians, and we can just be a free people with a pretty simple understanding that we have rights, but we don't have the right to abridge other people's rights. To have free trade. To have the freedom to choose our own lifestyle. Our own religion. Or non-religion. But we have to make that move. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv. And by the way, go to UCY.tv, scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, click the Amazon button, shop through Amazon, same great prices, and UCY gets a little kickback. Also, check out My Patriot Supply. If you go to antityrannynews.com/MyPatriot, it'll take you to My Patriot Supply. Great prepping gear, and we get a little kickback at antityrannynews.com to cover our operating costs on this end. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv. Again, great broadcast coming up after this. And thank you again for tuning in, and I will catch you next broadcast. And maybe my clock's a minute off. Probably. Also, don't forget, when you go prepping, you don't have to have everything. A little gold, a little silver, a little cash, seeds, ammo, a hunting weapon, rifle. You don't have to have everything, but you should try to prepare the best as possible. And when you go to the Amazon store at UCY.tv, that little button towards the bottom, we got great prepping gear already picked out, and even radiation prepping gear. And My Patriot Supply has great non-GMO seeds. Check them out. Thank you again.